All right, let's welcome very special guest today to our guest segment on the Pro Football Doc Sports Injury Central podcast. It's Mike Silver. And Mike, we only do guests in the off season because in season there's too much injury stuff to cover. I mean, we run too long. So I actually love the off season. And I'm thrilled that you could come on today because you fit perfectly into what I'm going to call my GOAT series. Okay. Prior to you, it was Bill Belichick, GOAT. After Bill Belichick was Dr. Robert Anderson, GOAT of foot and ankle surgery in the NFL.
Wow.
So now we have our third straight, what I would say, GOAT in the world here, Mike Silver. And let me tell you something. I mean this, look, we're friends and we've known each other a while, but I'm serious about this. As I talk to athletes and other people, you're super unusual. You're the GOAT because A, it doesn't matter who you write for, whether it's your book, and we'll talk about that, or SI back in the day, or Athletic Now, or NFL Network. People follow you along. They go with you, not the brand. But you're embedded everywhere, from players to owners to draft rooms. How do you get that done? I mean, it's amazing.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Back in the day, used to get incredible access to Bill Belichick. That has not been the case for the last, 18 years or so. So maybe you need to have us on together and we can hug it out cyber-wise. But yeah, listen.
Hey, Taylor, you need to clip that segment. The one thing that I have better access to than Mike Silver is Bill Belichick. I'll take that.
I think everyone does. But look, I come from kind of a different era of journalism and was always trying to get deep into the heart of stories and as much access as I could. Obviously, when I went to Sports Illustrated in the heyday in 1994, that was a great place for that. And we kind of took it up a notch. But yeah, I'm always trying. And most recently, I was in the Jacksonville Jaguars draft room in late April. And that was really, really cool. Even without them trading up to 2 to get Travis Hunter and making some big moves on day 2, it's just cool to see a new regime kind of working it out. And I don't take it for granted. I think, apparently I'm an exceptionally charming dude because I'm able to still fight my way into a few places in an era where it's a lot tougher.
So 2-part question for Jacksonville. Number 1, when did you know about the Travis Hunter trade? And number 2, did they make you say, I won't say it correctly, Duval or whatever you're supposed to
do? No, I was not, which is good because I don't think, even if I would consent to that, which I wouldn't, I don't think I could do it up to that standard. But it's a great question. I've known Tony Baselli a long time. Their new EVP of football operations, I think is his title, first draft pick in franchise history and a Hall of Famer. And he and I had talked for a while about the possibility of me doing it, got to know James Gladstone and Liam Cohen. I've known Shad Khan for a long time. And so it all kind of aligned. And I had a sense that something was brewing in general, that, there were a few comments made along the way, like, hey, it won't be boring, hey, what if we do something unconventional? So I felt like they were going to maybe take a swing. I was supposed to have dinner the night before the draft with Baselli, and he called me still stuck at the office. And he was like, look, can we just hang in the morning? We'll have lunch. It'll be better. And I was like, yeah, of course. And so I kind of started to ask a couple of questions. He's like, no, let's just do it tomorrow. It'll be better. So we sit down for lunch, and he's like, all right, here's what we're doing. And I was like, oh, that's going to be cool. So, I was definitely, that was about, the draft was still about 8-9 hours away. So I was, now even more pumped for the events to come. And, and it was one of those things where, you knew it was going to happen unless something weird happened, and something weird would have been Cam Ward still being on the board at 2 and Hunter not going 1, because if someone else had gone 1 and the Browns were sitting there at 2 and Cam Ward was there, they told the Jaguars, we're going to take him. And the trade's off. But that was an unlikely scenario. Once Cam Ward, as expected, went 1 to the Titans, we knew the trade was going to happen. And it was really fun to check it out and to watch the aftermath.
Well, that's news. I hadn't heard that before, that for sure Cam Ward would be taken. And the draft room access is really interesting. I don't think people realize that, like, offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators are typically not in the room. I mean, it's a very small room. I mean, and, you know, I was lucky enough to what I call sit at the kids' table back in the day for the Chargers. The head athletic trainer and I in the corner, you know, at a two-top in the corner with the big dining room table for Thanksgiving dinner with the owner and GM and assistant GM and the head coach only, you know, and as well as a few operations people. And we didn't dare walk by the draft board. Everything is so, you know, the magnets and whatever, everything is so secretive. I don't think people realize how big of a deal it is that you could get in there, because there was a lot of Jacksonville Jaguar higher ups that are not in that room the way that it works. And this ain't your first time. You did it with the Rams and got Michael Sam, the draft pick of Michael Sam. So are teams doing this to impress you, or were they always just trying to do this?
Well, each team is different, as you know, and I do think it's not, you know, of course you were in the room. Medical people do need to be in the room because these are big decisions, and you guys are uniquely positioned to weigh in on risk reward. So, you know, each team is different. Famously, with the Patriots, Belichick's draft rooms were incredibly tight. Like, it was, you know, him, Scott Pioli, couple other people, and they would call someone in every once in a while. But I had scouts and position coaches who would tell me, yeah, I watched it on TV just like everyone else. And then some teams let a lot more people in. And you referenced the Rams, and I was actually, I think, 4 times inside draft Rams war rooms during the Fisher era in both St. Louis and LA, including that Michael Sam pick. And that was a much broader draft room in terms of all the position coaches, the scouts, you know, much bigger, still very orderly and still ran very smoothly, but far more inclusive. This Jaguars war room was a lot tighter. You know, one thing I noticed pretty quickly is that Ethan Waugh, who had been their assistant general manager in the Trent Baalke era, after Trent Baalke was fired following the season, a little bit after the season, during the head coaching search, which is a whole other story, he became the acting general manager, as well as one of the 5 finalists for that GM job that ultimately went to James Gladstone. Really good guy. Talked to him in the building over those few days I was there, had good conversations with him. But that first night I was like, Ethan Waugh is not in the draft room and I am. That, A, is kind of bizarre, and 2, kind of tells me that, you know, this is not going to be a long-term arrangement. And, you know, as often happens when someone is up for a job at a place they've been, doesn't get it, you know, they end up leaving. And sure enough, you know, not too long after the draft, it was announced that he was leaving. And now he just accepted a job with the 49ers, where he worked a long, long time before coming to Jacksonville a few years ago. So, you know, when you're in there and the assistant GM isn't, that's a pretty bizarre set of circumstances. You know, the first time I did it with Jeff Fisher, we had talked about it. I was really close with Jeff Fisher. We talked about it at the Combine. I was at Yahoo Sports at the time. And, you know, I had never done it. I thought it would be really cool. And we kind of had a deal. And then Greg Williams, his newly hired defensive coordinator, who I knew well, had appealed his suspension for the bounty scandal in New Orleans. And in the course of that, while the appeal was still outstanding, I dropped that story on Yahoo Sports with the audio from the infamous meeting when Greg Williams was the Saints defensive coordinator before a playoff game against the 49ers, where he says, kill the head and the body will die, and talks about Frank Gore trying to injure him and going after his knee. And so I knew that when it was a massive story that dropped in the midst of this whole bounty scandal. And I knew that when that story dropped, it would not be good news for Greg Williams. And by extension for Jeff Fisher, who was hoping his suspension would be reduced and his newly hired defensive coordinator, would maybe get to coach some of that season. And so I had to call Jeff Fisher the day before the story dropped and tell him what was coming. And I'll never forget, I was in a Safeway shopping in my town, and he called me back and he just goes, how bad? And I go, on a scale of 1 to Greg Williams, it's pretty bad. And, then I just assumed that I would never get the access. Not so much because Jeff would renege it, but I just figured his owner or somebody in that building would go, that's the guy we're letting in our draft room, the guy who just, helped make our life, arguably more miserable. But it worked out. And then the night before, I'm having dinner with Jeff in Clayton, Missouri, and we're kind of laying out how it's going to work. And he gets this twinkle in his eye, and he says, I've been thinking about it, and you have full access, but there may be a time we want to stick you outside the room for some reason, or you might want to get out for some reason and make a call. And I kind of need a place to put you on the second floor. And he goes, I do have a vacant office. And that was how, not long after breaking the kill the head and the body will die story about Greg Williams, I set up shop in Greg Williams' vacant office at the Rams facility during the draft. Kind of a wild story.
Does Greg know that?
Greg does know that. In fact, because Greg and I, even though that was not a great moment for him and he wasn't loving me, we did have enough of a relationship where I think I was able to text him from his office at some point and be like, probably a BlackBerry picture because it was 2012, probably terrible.
A selfie? Yeah. Hey, I guess
no,
who's off
before the selfie days. It was like BlackBerry picture of his desk or something. But yeah, no, he knew. And, to Greg's credit, he and I were always cool and still are. So, anyway, I really, it does take a lot of trust for a team to do that, as you mentioned. And I have my own philosophy about doing it. If you're going to give me that access, I recognize that there may be some things that happen that, you don't want out in retrospect. For example, let's say the Rams during that time had dangled Sam Bradford in a trade and then didn't make the trade, and Sam Bradford remains their franchise quarterback. I don't know that it's fair to leave the Rams with that trash because they gave me the access. So to me, that would have been a conversation where I try to work with them, but I would say 99.99% of what I've encountered in all those times in draft rooms has ended up, going in the story. But I do philosophically understand that if you are giving me that opportunity, I shouldn't, it shouldn't turn out to be a horrible thing for you that you have to live with, in an uncomfortable way. And, honestly, one thing I've really, as it's evolved this last year that I told Tony and James and Liam and was really mindful of was, normally during a draft, I might be social media posting pretty heavily, speculating about what might be going on, reporting. I kind of turned all that off for their sake. In this specific case, I might be privately texting my colleagues at The Athletic about a couple other things, but basically I'm here as a Jaguars embedded reporter covering the Jaguars, and I'm not, out here floating some speculation because I am uniquely situated to know more because of my, position.
Well, in my time in the league, I think it became very clear to me the number of times that people explored options, the trades and discussions and potentials. That's their job, to tinker with the options. It doesn't always come true. And if everyone knew about every thing that came across the GM's desk, it would blow your mind, right? That doesn't mean you're going to do it. You just, well, let's see what it looks like. Okay, we're not doing that kind of thing. So I think that's very fair. But you've been embedded with the coaches and players, but you also have a very unique situation where you're very embedded with owners, and not just at the league meeting when they're supposed to talk and kind of thing. And I've seen it. Look, everyone gets access to the press conferences and Radio Row and all this other stuff. But let me tell you, I've never really seen any media except you get access to like Super Bowl parties after they win. I remember in Minnesota, I was there because I knew a friend on the team. Okay. You were there embedded in the Super Bowl party for the Eagles afterwards and getting owner access. So it's very unusual. And to that end, I'd love to ask you a little bit about Jim Irsay, someone I think you were very close to. Jim
Yeah.
Irsay is someone I never knew personally. So this is why I've never tweeted condolences on that. Just like he's obviously a very public figure. But correct me if I'm wrong. What am I missing here in that it seems like his the thoughts and words that people are saying about him now are unbelievable, right? From what you've said to Peyton Manning, to his wide receiver coach, Reggie Wayne, et cetera, bringing tears to his eyes, is this unbelievable owner. And it seems like that's a side of him that we didn't fully see publicly when he was alive. When we saw he wasn't a bad owner, but we didn't see all of this stuff that has now come out. Is that accurate, or why is that, or what's your thought on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've never wavered on Jim Irsay, just a sweet, sweet man who is an American original, and there's no one like him. I'll be going to his memorial service, in the next couple of days, and this one really hurts. I started out covering one of the great owners and one of the most colorful owners ever in Eddie DeBartolo, and we had a very kind of open relationship. Sometimes he yelled and screamed. Sometimes, he brought shots over to the table I was sitting at, but, it was very raw and kind of cool. And that was my introduction to it. And like Eddie DeBartolo, Jim Irsay is one of those people who had a lot of flaws, but wasn't trying to pretend otherwise, and was very real and very emotionally connected to the people in the organization he presided over and those in his orbit, and that's why I think you're seeing so much motion now. I used to do owner rankings at SportsIllustrated.com and then Yahoo, and I was pretty brutal. I'd rank them 1 to 32, and I got pretty personal about how I thought, especially the back half, was not doing great things for their team and fan base. And then I went to work at NFL Network in 2013. So they essentially hired me. And, in the back of my head, I'm thinking it's very possible they just decided we are sick of this guy. Let's just bring him in. So it was kind of a weird thing that I technically went to work for them for 8 years. And now, of course, I'm free to bring back owner rankings, which I very well may, because it was a lot of fun. But Jim's a guy that I got to know a long time ago. And it was always under the backdrop of, his father was kind of this legendary, gruff, drunken, perceived a-hole villain who moved the Colts out of Baltimore in the middle of the night and went on, drunken tirades and didn't treat people very well and was not well liked around the league and in the building and anywhere else. So I knew about Robert Irsay and all of that as a young journalist. And so when I met Jimmy, I was like, whoa, this guy is his son, but he's completely, different. He is very welcoming and pure and, almost, there's an inherent sweetness about him. And, so that was kind of the first thing that blew me away. We have a shared love of music and counterculture and, songwriting and writing in general. And, that's kind of always been our our thing. He brought me in very early and confided in me about a lot of things and gave me access. And then ultimately, as he started living out his dreams and assembling the greatest, not just sports memorabilia or music memorabilia, but greatest cool memorabilia collection ever on earth. And instead of hoarding it, touring it around the country with his friends who are rock stars, and a band that he would perform in would then do gigs and people would get to see the memorabilia. And I got to hold Tiger, Jerry Garcia's guitar, and see Ringo's drum kit, et cetera, et cetera. He started inviting me along, and now I'm friends with, some rock stars because of Jim Irsay. I mean, it's wild, right? So, I just, people would ask me about him, my friends, and they'd be like, what's he like? And I'd be like, at this point, he's kind of like you if you had billions of dollars. Like, I want David Gilmour's Black Strat. What does that cost at an auction? I want it. Why do I want it? Because it's the Black Strat. I just want to have it. And then like touring around with it and kind of sharing, Jimmy told me, I don't own these things. I'm a steward. Basically he didn't see it like he bought them to own. And I'm sure I'll know more in a couple of days once I talk to some of the people, at this memorial service, but I'm sure there will be a museum or some sort of way for these, these beautiful items, and not just music, but, the wanted poster for John Wilkes Booth, or the Jack Kerouac scroll of On the Road, and so many other things. There will be a way for people to, to share in that. So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Jeffrey Lurie, who I was with. I another guy that I've gotten really close to, just in terms of covering the league. There are a lot of owners I'm not close to. A lot of owners who still hate me because of the old owner rankings. A lot of owners I've had to criticize since. And by the way, including Jim Irsay. I mean, the last column of mine that he may have read, pertaining to his team, was I had just gotten to The Athletic, and I kind of crushed his current general manager, Chris Ballard, who Jim Irsay called the greatest GM of the 21st century GM candidate when he hired him. And that's how I started the column. And it was kind of a tough love, like, hey, Jim Irsay, this is not what you proclaimed him to be, and here's why. And I know on some level he understood that it came from a place of love, but, sometimes you got to be a journalist too. And so, yeah, I just kind of, sometimes I have relationships along the way. Sometimes they're more real than others. In the case of Jimmy, it was kind of different, and he's different. And it is really, really sad to me, that we won't get to continue this cool journey that we've both been on. And, I know in this column I wrote about him at The Athletic, there's a quote where he says to me, you and I are the same generation. We kind of grew up together. I remember when he said it to me, I'm thinking, no, you're older, a little older, and you're a different, but realistically, I started covering the NFL in 1989. So, it's not that far off. And I just love that he, was able to have that reference point in his head as it's changed so much over the years.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, and Jim Irsay. I've got a lot of respect for him in this way. Look, all the stories that are coming out are real stories about him, and I didn't know him, like I said, at all, and all I saw was the public's side. The eccentricities and some of the drug stuff and the drinking, the negative stuff, right? And I didn't see the whole picture. But I'm smart enough to know that owners have the resources to rehab their images publicly with different leaks and different stories and different things. And he had a lot of great stories, but he never did it. So I do have a lot of respect. He could have changed his public perception.
Let me take a whack here on the most important thing. And listen, I understand the caricature part, and I know the Twitter stuff, freak people out too, but it's like the raspy voice and the eccentricity and obviously the demons he battled. And remember, his dad was an alcoholic. Like, Jimmy had a hard life from the beginning, and, did a great job of not being a bitter, grumpy person, but he battled a lot of things. And yeah, the voice and the demons and the, he threw himself out there. But one thing that I will stand on that I've been saying for years and years and years publicly is you're missing it. If you don't think Jim Irsay knows ball, you are missing it. And for example, like Ryan Grigson, who was his general manager for 5 years and, was very bummed when Jim fired him, but remains very, very, emotionally attached to him and will be at this memorial service too. But Ryan Grigson told me, Jim was a GM. He was a general manager before he basically had to become the acting owner when his father suffered a stroke in '87, I believe. And then he went and got Bill Polian. But Jim Irsay's, other than Al Davis, who has passed away, and Jerry Jones, who calls himself the GM, Jim Irsay is the only owner who's like been a GM and gets it. And like to Grigson, that was like, this is awesome. He understands. And I've had so many conversations about football with Jim Irsay where I'm like, dude, this guy knows ball. Like he may not keep up with it the way a GM would anymore on that granular level, but his understanding of the game, about the emotions of it, about what makes a championship team, about what obstacles a team has to overcome. I mean, I'll never forget in 2021, the Colts looked to be cruising to a playoff berth. That was, I believe, the Carson Wentz year, and all they had to do going into the last game of the season was win in Jacksonville, and that's when the Jags were going for the number 1 pick. They ended up getting it because I think the second worst team, also lost, but on paper needed to lose that game, so they had no incentive to win. It was in Jacksonville. The Colts had every reason to need to win to get into the playoffs, and Jim told me going into that game, this is a real, I do not take this for granted. We really have to be on it. And he was like all over it. And then they went out and not only lost, but looked lifeless. They got down big early and almost didn't compete. And I was surprised he didn't fire everyone after that game. I remember going into that next season saying Frank Reich is very much on the hot seat going in, because it's amazing. It's like everything Jim said to me, and it was public too, because I wrote it going into the game. Everything he said to me about what they needed to do and their approach emotionally and mentally for that game needed to be was not what happened. And I just, his understanding of the sport, his reverence for it, his understanding of organizational, excellence was insanely high. And that's part of why I wrote what I wrote when I got to The Athletic in the fall about Ballard, who is in my business, has gotten more praise for less achievement than almost any human. And Ryan Grigson, say what you will about the bad bedside manner and the offensive line issues. Go look at his record over those 5 years, and coming off a 2-14 when he took the job. And yeah, they had Andrew Luck, but even without Andrew Luck, that team won lots and lots of games. And the Colts have not done that. And I know what Jim's standards are, and I know it had to be eaten at him. And it's obviously not the most important thing now as I talk about him. But if you're one of those people who, will think about Jim Irsay in a way that thinks he was just kind of this, eccentric, fool who happened to have a lot of money. No, this guy understood football in a really granular way, and it was really cool.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I want to ask you this other question. The question is close to me. I love Coach Rivera, Ron Rivera. Relationship with him, obviously you do as well, with Cal and what have you. And of course, we mentioned Bill Belichick before. Here we have 2 former NFL head coaches, both in the college world. Of course, Belichick coaching and Ron Rivera GMing Cal. Who is going to have more success and why? What's your thought there?
Well, my immediate question is, who's going to have more success on that Friday night in October in Berkeley when the Bears and Tar Heels do battle? Because I
should have phrased it better. And of course, you as the journalist and storyteller, of course,
Oh, no, I won't be there as a journalist. I will be there as a proud representative of my alma mater. And as soon as I heard I didn't know when the game was going to be played, but as soon as I saw that there was going to be a North Carolina at Cal game and then Belichick got hired, I told my good friends in the Cal football program, I said, okay, I want all black Cal gear, sunglasses, day or night. I will be wearing black Cal, black and gold, like the old license plate. And I will just stand there on the sidelines and I'm just going to stare back at Bill for 3.5 hours. And, that's obviously me joking. I have a ton of respect for Bill. And though we have fallen out professionally, if somebody brought me and Bill in the same room, I would, extend my hand. And we've been through a lot together. And as you said, he's one of the highest achieving people in the history of the sport, obviously. So I think it's cool that he came back. I thought both he and Pete Carroll should have gotten immediate chances to keep coaching in the NFL based on achievement and how good they are. I was really happy Raheem Morris got that Atlanta job. And I want to get into that because he's one of the 5 subjects of my book, The Why is Everything. So let's do that next. But in general, I thought Bill should have gotten an NFL job, and it would have been great. And, I understand why he got fed up and said, fine, I'm going to take this Tar Heel job. And, listen, college football is weird right now and it's tough. And I'm really grateful Ron Rivera is back at Cal to try to help us sort through that ever-changing landscape that is a constant challenge for us and for a lot of other programs. But, look, if you're North Carolina, you got to be pretty happy that one of the all-time greats is giving it a shot. And so, I would expect Bill Belichick to have a ton of success at coaching. I know there's NIL and transfer and you got to get the guys, but is there going to be a game schematically where the Tar Heels are overmatched or outcoached? I'm going to say absolutely never. Are there going to be games where he schematically toys with the people on the other sideline? I'm going to say, yeah, good chance. And I think obviously it's exciting for college football to have it. I don't know if college football fans and media members appreciate it fully because I've seen some weird things about I don't know if he's really like, dude, it's Bill Belichick. Show some respect because college football is like, me doing algebra in 7th grade and looking like a star student. And the NFL is like the calculus classes I stopped trying to even take late in high school, let alone at Cal, because it was way too advanced for me. So yeah, Bill Belichick in college is going to be awesome. I hope, Justin Wilcox, who's great schematically and has done a really cool job of trying to navigate his way through some of Cal's challenges. And it's a big year for him. I obviously hope on that night we show out. And having Ron back in Berkeley is such a blessing. As a person, he and his wife Stephanie, like my wife Leslie, and I, a Cal couple, a lot of love for the school, and it's just great to have them home, and then be an incredible coach and just an incredible person to have in place to help the football program try to adjust to this new era. And so just thrilled that he's back, and obviously, as Ron knows, trying to help him in any way that I can, as we all go through this. And also go Cal softball. We're trying to build Cal softball back to its rightful place where it would be playing right now with the last 6 teams standing, which is our heritage. And we have a new stadium coming, and I know, the Riveras and especially Stephanie have done massive things to try to help the Cal softball program, as have I. So go Cal softball. We are on our way with Chelsea Spencer as the head coach, on our way back to the prominence that we claim as our birthright, and it's coming.
don't now you're talking about Cal. Don't sleep on Cal rugby. That's the program that's
never. We just won another national championship with the great
I
Jack
know.
Clark.
It's like every single one, Jack Clark and Cal
Yeah,
rugby.
it had been a few years. It was nice, but yeah, no, Cal rugby is obviously great. And yeah, listen, you know, I don't cover college sports, so I can just be the proud representative of my alma mater and fanboy that you know my heart desires when it comes to that.
All right, let's. I do want to talk about the book, but the stories are so good, and anyone watching this podcast can tell that Mike Silver has so many stories. You could write 7 books, right? Easily. So, when I'm curious, you know, the book, The Why is Everything, Football, Rivalry, Revolution. Tell me more about the rivalry and revolution part. Everyone knows you know the football part.
Yeah, although I think you'll understand the football part a lot better if you're like me, you know, going through this. So this book is about the Shanahan-McVay tree and all its petty splendor. So I know that it's kind of a high concept that these 5 coaches, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel, Matt LaFleur, and Raheem Morris, are emblematic of a group that is changing the game and the way it's the approach to coaching. And that is throughout the book. But I don't want people to think it's just some leadership, businessy, high concept thing. There is plenty of rivalry and pettiness. And there are a lot of stories that you'll go, oh, whoa, that happened when the 49ers and Rams were getting ready to play each other. Or, oh, like, I did not realize that Kyle Shanahan and Matt LaFleur had beef over Aaron Rodgers. You know, there's a lot along the way. But you know, really, this book starts The Why is Everything, and Father's Day is coming up, so it is a perfect time for me to plug it. You know, it really starts with Mike Shanahan coming to the 49ers as their offensive coordinator under George Seifert in 1992. As an embattled guy, he'd been fired unceremoniously by Dan Reeves in Denver, fired after a stormy tenure as Al Davis's young hotshot head coach with the LA Raiders, and comes into San Francisco and kind of runs the Walsh offense, right? And Steve Young, who's also at the time embattled because he isn't Joe Montana, and Mike Shanahan together take this offense to an incredible level, culminating in that Super Bowl, you know well, Super Bowl 29 in Miami, where Steve throws 6 touchdown passes, breaks Joe Montana's record, defeats the Chargers. So, and then Mike goes to Denver, incorporates out the outside zone running scheme, merges that with the Walsh offense. And then we kind of fast forward to 2010, where he has that staff in Washington that includes his son and Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Raheem Morris, Mike McDaniel, among others. And they, in 2012, are presented with this football problem, which is they've gone and gotten Robert Griffin III from Baylor. He's never taken a snap from under center. He's the number 2 pick in the draft. And how are we going to teach this guy who's never really run pro concepts to run our complicated, tried and tested scheme? And back then it wasn't like, oh, we'll just change our scheme. It was like quarterbacks have to learn the pro stuff. And what they ultimately decide to do is it's kind of simple, but also revolutionary. Is they're like, oh, we're going to just change it so our whole scheme can be run out of the pistol, which is that modified shotgun formation. And it is a weird thing that requires a lot of mental gymnastics, and they do it. And then the whole league is completely caught off guard, and he has that record-setting rookie season, and they go to the playoffs, and you know, they gain 1,200 yards on one simple passing concept called drift that nobody can adjust to, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of where, you know, eventually it ends badly in Washington, as it always did in the Dan Snyder era for anyone, because of organizational dysfunction. But they all kind of go off and put their own spin on that way of thinking. And so, yeah, it's loaded with stuff. I had incredible access to all of these people, including Mike Shanahan. And one of the like delicious surprises of this book for me was, and I ended up taking a job at the San Francisco Chronicle as a columnist in August of 2022, kind of as I was reporting and writing this. But one of the cool things was I was spending a bunch of time with Mike Shanahan in that 2022 offseason in Colorado. And, of course, Trey Lance was now the presumed starter. They had traded 3 ones. He'd had a rookie season. It was believed Jimmy Garoppolo would be on his way out, though they ended up bringing him back for that 1 more year. And everyone thought it was the Trey Lance era. And so, I had a lot of questions from Mike about Trey Lance and Jimmy. And he kept in May and June and again in early September, kept bringing up this guy they drafted 262nd and last that year that was also on the roster, Brock Purdy. And I was like, yeah, okay. But like in strikingly complimentary tones. And I've known Mike Shanahan a long time, and I trust him on football, as much as anyone on earth. And it really got my attention. And so Mike had seen tape of OTAs and mini camps, and I think some of it in person. And so then when I got to training camp and started watching Brock Purdy, I was like, wow, he's got some swag to him. Wow, he's fitting the ball in some places. And then now fast forward to the day before the regular season opener in 2022. The Niners are getting ready to play the Bears in Chicago. Trey Lance is the starter. And Mike Shanahan, who grew up not too far from there, in Illinois, is in the Chicago area, has me meet him in his hotel room at the JW Marriott in downtown Chicago. And I go up and we sit down, and, Trey Lance is getting ready to start for the first time as the starter. And I ask him about Trey Lance, and he pivots the conversation again to Brock Purdy. And he says, at the end of this long Brock Purdy thing, says, when you get a guy like that in your building, you don't let him out. And I'm kind of like, I remember the weird feeling, and I'm like looking at him like, are we sure we're talking about Brock Purdy? Like, whoa. And, of course he knew. I think he and Kyle would tell you, if you gave Kyle truth serum in this specific case, he knew before Kyle knew, at least to that level, what they might have.
Well, in the end, if you would have drafted Brock Purdy #1 for 3 picks and Trey Lance #262, it'd be the same result. So in the end,
right. It's like in football, if I said to you, hey, there's an organization where they're going to use 3 ones to take a guy 3rd overall at quarterback, and he's going to bomb, you would say, okay, GM fired, coach fired, everyone fired, organization set back years, right? Like that's the normal. But little asterisk, unless the next year at 262, you get a franchise quarterback who can almost win the Super Bowl in his first full year as the starter, then you'd be like, oh, I guess everyone might keep their job. So when they paid Brock Purdy, I was like, okay, it's a lot of money. 2 things. Number one, because of the dumb rookie wage scale, he's arguably the most underpaid person the last 3 years in the history of the league, by what he could make on an open market. Number 2, dude, pay the tax, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and even Jed York. He saved you guys. Pay the tax. Give the man his money.
Well, they have there. Look, you've on the one hand, I have to thank you a ton, in the sense that you've kept up the GOAT series here, where I think everyone sees this conversation. They see Mike Silver as the GOAT that I always knew that you were. On the other hand, you're making my job hard for next week. Who am I going to get to try and
see
fill the
this
shoes?
is already. I listen. I appreciate it, but I think, let's be honest. Like, following Belichick is a lot like the Who not wanting, and I'm not the Who, but just not wanting to follow Hendrix at Monterey Pop in 1967 after he set his guitar on fire famously and, ripped off one of the most mind-blowing things that had ever been seen in the States or anywhere else. And Pete Townsend, one of the greatest of all time, and Roger Daltrey, they were like, no, we're not following him. Nope. And so I understand, because, Bill's always good. And obviously right now, Bill, who has a book out, is in high demand. And sometimes his interviews, sometimes even the procedure of his interview, setup is like some people consider news. Me, not so much. I'm not so into all those weird.
The only woman and female involved in setting up this interview is my daughter, who's been on a play date here. There's nobody
by
else
the way,
involved.
Dr. Chao, my
Setting up
daughter
this
Natalie
interview. I
says
was
hi
texting.
because I was
hi.
my daughter Natalie is now in her late 20s, but
Okay.
My daughter Natalie, I was just texting before this interview, and she said to say hi to you and to send her love. And the reason my daughter is such a big fan of yours is because in her senior year, she wanted to play in a club soccer tournament in Las Vegas with a bum foot, and I just wanted to try to, see if limits could be pushed with pain meds. And you, of course, didn't give me any medical advice, but you kind of just directed me to some literature about what the upper limits of pain meds could be. She went for it. She then went foot on foot with someone who outweighed her about 80 pounds, broke the foot, sat out a couple months, and did make it back for the end of her senior high school season. So it wasn't ideal, but she did play. She did make it back for senior day, and she does send her love.
Oh, well, that's a nice story. So as we wrap up here, your book, where do they get it?
Oh, everywhere. Certainly on Amazon or any other site.
Amazon still sells books.
You can click. It should be in every bookstore around. I'm certain if you want to support your local bookstore, you can find The Why Is Everything. If they don't have it, they can order it and get it very quickly. If they don't have it, because other people watching this podcast are grabbing them off the shelves. But yeah, you can go to Amazon or any other online site right now and grab it. It's Father's Day. I guarantee any father will be stoked, and the kids are going to want to read it too, because the dad's going to be like, "Yo, you should read this. It's great."
All right. Thank you, Mike Silver, my friend. I appreciate you, taking all this time and ahead of Father's Day gift, helping a lot of the fans out there with what to get. And we'll try and look, this is why we do guest podcasts in the off season, because then we'd have no time to talk about injuries, but it's off season. So we'll make it this whole episode. We try and keep it to an hour. So we'll make it this whole podcast about Mike Silver, part of the GOAT series. And that's what the GOAT series are all about. So appreciate you, my friend. And we'll see you soon. And we'll see you guys next week on the Pro Football Doc Sports Injury Central podcast.